right. Today is February 26, 2026. I am Claudia Kramer, the Probasco Distinguished Chair of Free Enterprise and Professor of Economics at University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and I am joined by Jacob Levy and also Mr. Steve Forbes. So thanks for joining me.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. So growing up in the Forbes family, you were surrounded by business, media, and a particular vision of America. What did that actually feel like from the inside, and was free enterprise something that you absorbed at the dinner table, or was it something that you learned later in life?
You absorbed it just by seeing how your father and grandfather operated in business, being how people worked in the real world, reading. So it wasn't so much formal lessons, but seeing real-life examples unfold. Forbes magazine is always focused on people who do things. My grandfather was thinking of naming the magazine when he started Doers and Doings. And in those days, though, they said you should use your surname, like you had Scribners and Harpers and the like. So he called it Forbes. And and growing up my grandfather always wanted to be a business writer. He grew up in Scotland, one of 10 children, eighth grade education, and taught himself what they called at the time shorthand, so he could take down verbatim conversations. And then eventually he was number 6 out of 10 children. But he came to the U.S. at the turn of the century and tried to get a job in New York. Had no luck, and so he did a bit of entrepreneurship. He went to an editor one day and said, I'll work for you for free for several weeks, and if I show you my worth, I trust you'll hire me. My grandfather had no idea whether the guy would just take the free labor and toss him out, but he also knew that if he continued to do things the traditional way, he wasn't going to get anywhere. He got the job, and then being very energetic and full of ambition, he went to another editor using a different name and got a job there as business reporter. And my probably one of his happiest days was when the two editors got in an argument as to who had the best business writer. It was my grandfather in both cases. And so those kinds of stories resonate more than saying, free enterprise or things like that, real stories in real life. But also, too, we grew up with how the magazine did very well in the 1920s. He was offered equivalent of tens of millions of dollars to sell out to William Randolph Hearst, who was the biggest media mogul of the time, model for Citizen Kane. And he turned it down proudly. And then came the Great Depression. 3 years later, the company was busted in all but name and barely survived, couldn't cash his own paychecks because there just wasn't money in the bank. And one of the, again, happiest moments was when years later he could start cashing those checks that had piled up in the safe because there was no money in the bank at the time. So we learned just through stories like that success is not permanent, that it is like a garden. You have to keep tending to it, and things do change, which is why, for example, my father took us to business meetings, functions at a fairly young age. Not that we'd understand what was going on, but he wanted us to see, I had 3 brothers and a sister, what it took to make these things happen. It just didn't grow on a tree. You have to go work and tend to it like a garden. Take nothing for granted. As he'd like to say, if you think you've arrived, you're ready to be shown the door.
Fantastic. Fantastic stories. It strikes me how every person really is sort of a midpoint in a century worth of life, more than that, maybe even 150 years. And listening to you talk about that and thinking about the stories that could be told, how do you have any thoughts? Can you share thoughts with us about that period of time that your grandfather rose up in, your period of time, and what you see from the generation sort of currently coming up?
Well, I'd like to quote the late, great Peter Drucker, who was an immigrant to this country from Austria and became a business guru, wrote books that are still read, some of them in business schools today, did some writing for us. And he like to point out, he said every organization, whether it's a business, nonprofit, education, or whatever, should ask themselves, what is your purpose? What is your mission? What is it you're trying to achieve? And if you do that, you're less likely to get caught up on how you've been doing it and realize there are different ways to do it. And so that held us in good stead. Over the years, we did have enormous changes.
We did.
And going online. Today, it's almost all online.
Right.
And we now have online, as pointed out to the kids earlier today, when we were print magazine only, we do 800, 1,000 articles a year. Online now, with 1,500 contracted contributors, we probably do 100,000 postings a year. And so a different way of doing the same thing. Now, of course, AI has come along, disrupted everything, as Google and others can testify. And so we're going to have to adjust again. How do we achieve it in a changing environment? And the key thing is, how do we serve entrepreneurs or people who want to be entrepreneurs? We're not cheerleaders, although we'll praise those who seem to be doing good things. But we do get critical if somebody seems to be messing up. Like you may love stage plays, but you hate it when it's botched. So we feel the same way about business success. And I think that's one reason why Forbes, the name has resonance around the world, is that entrepreneurs sort of recognize we see them as heroes, not as scoundrels, which so much of the media culture does today.
What do you think that is? Why does the media? I have an intensely strong interest in the media myself. A topic for another conversation, perhaps. But why do you think the media treats entrepreneurs or businessmen that way today?
I think part of it is assuming that commerce has never been held in high regard, because in olden times was the landlord who likes landlords, or monopolist merchants who likes them. Mm-hmm. So they've always gotten a bad rap. And even in England, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, commerce was looked down on, tradesmen. So writing a novel or a poem or doing a painting was seen as more noble than engaging in grubby commerce. But also, too, especially where you had some free enterprise, what you found was you had people who may not have been like you, who came from a different background. And who are these gate crashers, so to speak, always coming in. And then today, one of the bad things about when you have unstable currencies, it undermines what you might call social trust. Money enables you, I don't have to know you, but if we trust the money, we can do a transaction together. And now, if you don't trust the money, you're less likely to be trusting the people. And you see things happen that seem to go against real values. Speculators seem to do better than people who create real products and services. Something's not right. John Maynard Keynes pointed out, he said when you have an inflation, hyperinflation, not one person in a million recognizes what is going on when the world is being turned upside down. So you look for scapegoats. In Roman times, it was Christians. The lions didn't mind, but they were seen as causes of bad things. Witches in medieval times. In the early 20s, when you had the terrible German Weimar Republic inflation, Jewish merchants and Jewish bankers were seen as the villains causing this terrible catastrophe.
Not for the first time.
And so as a result, we see it scapegoating today. Now, maybe some people are doing bad things and price gouging and the like, but you have to ask, how did you create an environment where you're mad at this group, mad at that group? And so business commerce has never been, except for brief periods, portrayed as something noble. And that's one of the reasons why, by the way, I've been working with the Free to Choose Foundation. They have an education supplement called Is It? How they come up with that name, I have no idea. Sounds like something that came out of a computer late at night. IZZIT. Is it?
I thought at least it was two words,
.org?
probably, you know?
Yeah.
I was picking up on some sort of skepticism or something, or the question mark at the end, you know? And no, it's not that.
Yeah, is it .org? But we're doing 3 to 4 minute biographies of people who created the modern world that are unheralded. But we felt that stories get a point, get across ideas and abstractions far better than the abstractions themselves. To say free enterprise, what does that mean? So real life stories gets the point across. And it's never a straight line for these people. But what does it take to make something happen? There was an essay back in the 50s called I Pencil,
Indeed.
which the simple thing of a pencil, what goes into the production of a pencil. And so we're trying to get people to appreciate these things just don't happen. People make them happen and go through a lot of trouble and barriers to bring it to life. And the thing about an entrepreneur is the last one to get paid. You got to keep the investors happy.
Indeed.
You got to get the customers. You got to pay your people. Maybe you can get them take some stock or something. But if it succeeds, you're the last in line. Now, you may do very well, but most new businesses don't succeed. But this idea of going out and doing it on your own, really in this country, goes back to colonial times, where there's no easy silver mines or gold mines as you had in the Americas, Central and South America. You had to do it the hard way. And you were not getting any help from the mother country. And so, and also, too, people came here for various reasons, some for commercial, Jamestown, but others for religious reasons, the Pilgrims. And you'd have whole congregations pulling up roots to the Mayflower. They first went to Holland and then came to Massachusetts. So they had this idea of had a spiritual side that gets overlooked today, but also the idea of equality before God. And while it was imperfectly realized, that set the template for those profound words, all men are created equal.
Sometimes I think that Jefferson missed by just 3 words. All men are created equal before the law. Because decidedly we are not created equal, but I digress.
Yeah, no, but it's very true. And one of the things that happened in North America, because the Brits had a very haphazard approach to colonial policy, unlike the French, who are very rigid and very domineering from Paris. Here, you're sort of on your own. And so we got colonial assemblies, and people came over with the idea of the Glorious Revolution from England in 1688, with pamphleteering and dominance of Parliament versus the monarchy. You had what they call the Great Awakening here, which was a reaction against the Church of England. John Adams said it was a rehearsal for the Revolution. So people were accustomed to doing things on their own. So when the Brits tried to change the rules of the game, guess what happened?
Indeed. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So I love the idea of storytelling. I've been in economics professionally for a while now and find it frustrating that I think we have a PR problem. That's how my conclusion in terms of getting our message across, especially as an academic economist. We're not very good in 3 to 4 minute chunks. We're not very good at storytelling. I want to explain the whole concept and walk you through all of the logic. So how do you see Forbes Media and as you mentioned, the change from, moving from print to online and now even in the world of influencers, where does that role of media fit into messaging for free enterprise or even more narrowly?
Well, one of the things economists should do, some of them, is stop saying economics is about the allocation of scarce resources. Boy, that is a downer. If
I know.
Ever heard
No
it.
one wants to study that for some reason.
And so what they should emphasize, and it's true, is it's about the creation of resources.
Love that.
And people that gets allocated by people in the marketplace buying and selling. You don't need a science of it. People do it. And it's about the creation, which is a much more noble and exciting thing. And so that's why economics, part of the problem, let's relate to Isaac Newton. And when he came along, and suddenly science was the big hot thing. And disciplines, all of them wanted to be a science, the science of politics, political science. It isn't. And science of history, the Germans were big on that. So they had science envy. And and you saw it in economics, all these numbers and equations. Yep. And so you need less of that and more Adam Smith going to the factory and making. He didn't say he talked about division of labor, but it came to life with the pin maker.
That's right.
You could make one pin a day, but if you divided the labor, you could make thousands a day. And so going to the pin factory is what economists need more to do. And the other thing is get over the idea that you can constructively guide an economy from the top. One of the great flaws of the Federal Reserve, which nobody seems to really question, is why do they think that manipulating the economy, either depressing it or stimulating it, because they think that's how you control inflation. Why do a handful of people want to try to control an economy of 340 million people, or 8 billion around the world? We do live in a global economy. Is preposterous and very destructive idea. And what you want is just create the conditions: stable money, low tax rates, and sensible rules of the road. And it's amazing what people do from the most unlikely sources, but it means we don't need your models. For example, the Federal Reserve has their modeling is garbage. They ignore the role of taxation. Yeah. They ignore the role of regulation. Nothing in their models on regulation, and so they purport to. There was a story when Commerce Secretary in President Trump's first term got a call. They were complaining about interest rates, and they got a call from the head of the Fed. And the head of the Fed said, Powell said, well, our models show blah, blah, blah. He actually took him seriously, which is ridiculous. And I hope Kevin Warsh, I think he'll get through the Senate process. By the way, one little aside, how we ever got in the habit of calling heads of organizations chairs. I mean, I guess it's better than sofas, but why don't you say chairman, chairperson, just chair Powell, okay. Yeah, table Forbes, I don't know.
Yeah, there we go.
But they really believe in this, and it's very destructive because the Fed, because they believe in the Phillips curve, which says inflation comes from too much prosperity, that they have a bias against growth. They assume we can't go above 1.8% growth, whereas for 200 years we did above 3. And if we did above 3, guess what happens? Social Security does not run out of money. Medicare, Medicaid do not run out of money. And so let's focus on how you get growth. It's the only way you deal with debt. The only way you create an environment where people are focused less on envy and more on my prospects are improving. Isn't that exciting?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is very interesting. I think you mentioned leadership at the Fed. These are people who come from some of our most elite institutions around the country. They have elite sort of backgrounds and should have exposure to very erudite and esteemed personages in their lifetimes before they arrive in these positions. But they don't seem to be able to come to this sort of the simple proposition like, let's grow our way out of this. Yes, let's get past this 1.8. Or that there might be an actual dollar offshore, a market, offshore for United States dollars. They don't even seem to be aware of a euro-dollar concept.
That's a phrase you don't hear anymore.
Why? What do you think is sort of the root of that?
It's the way they're taught, and I'll lay part of it at Keynes and the Great Depression. And so you might say they're the equivalent in astronomy being taught Ptolemy. The Earth, the sun revolves around the Earth. Had mathematical equations to prove it. And then Copernicus came along and said, redo the math, and it's the opposite way around. And today, at least, you don't get burned at the stake or threatened with torture if you come up with. But in terms of you try to get ahead in a department, disparaging mathematical models and John Maynard Keynes, good luck in most of them. So oftentimes, you see it in business all the time, it's often the outsiders who upend things, not from the outside rather than from the inside.
Sure.
So we're going to have to do the same thing with central banking. So, and what happened with the Depression was it was so unforeseen, such a catastrophe, that the idea rose up, the markets can't be trusted, which are people. And so therefore the government has to be there to make sure things don't go off the rails. And one of the things that gets totally ignored is the forgotten Depression of 1920-21. After World War I, the Fed put on the brakes, and for a while in the industry you had 20% unemployment. And how did the government respond? Slash spending, got rid of wartime controls, and cut taxes. And within a short period of time, the downturn ended, and we had the Roaring '20s, one of the most remarkable decades in history. It wasn't just bathtub gin and Charleston and Fitzgerald, and it was a remarkable, innovative decade. And by the way, it was a decade that got what they call labor-saving devices, and like vacuum cleaners and washing machines and the like. But one of the most popular was electric irons.
Wow.
Because to get an iron before electricity, you had to heat it up, which was a great source of accident, trying to get a fire and heat the iron. And electric iron, you didn't have to worry so much about that anymore. So unfortunately, and this won't be welcome in certain circles, but what brought on the crash in '29 was the advent of the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Markets try to anticipate the future. And Hoover comes in, Herbert Hoover. We had a very depressed agricultural sector because farmers were so efficient that he thought the answer was put on tariffs on Canada and other countries to help the American farmer. So he did something that in those days Congress usually reconvened in December. That was changed years later. So he called a special session of Congress. Well, Congress decided, well, and they often became runaway. This one did too. Well, if we're going to help farmers, let's put tariffs on everything. So literally hundreds of thousands of items they put taxes on. And suddenly the markets realized that instead of earnings going up, they're going to go down. And so the markets broke. And the amazing thing in late 1929 was when it looked like this Smoot-Hawley was going to be sidetracked, the market made a impressive recovery. Didn't recover all the ground, but covered a lot of it very quickly. Then Hoover signed the bill, and then we made other mistakes. Imagine raising taxes when the economy is declining.
What do you make of the, if you've read any of it,
But anyway, just
excuse me, yes.
On that, so the idea arose. The idea of manipulating money has been around for hundreds of years. And that's why, talking about Copernicus, he wrote an essay on money. It wasn't just stars and the like, that a friend of mine has just reissued.
Oh, wow.
But free markets were discredited because you had seemingly no solution. And so the government messed up, governments messed up, and free enterprise got the rap.
Indeed. I've come across some interesting research also to your earlier point about Fed policy during that period of time. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, the Fed gets perhaps overwrapped for that, but
so you're not 100% on Friedman's story on
no,
that?
because it was other things that brought it on.
Okay.
And while there are thousands of bank failures, why did we have so many banks? Because of crazy regulation. In some states, you couldn't branch. So Illinois, Chicago banks went through all these contortions to become, in effect, national banks, even though they had one office in Illinois. Crazy. But anyway, the percentage of assets that were actually destroyed was not that great. And where they did fail big time was there was a bank called Bank of the United States in New York, served the immigrant community. and was Jewish managers, and so there was the prejudice then. They could have saved, Friedman makes this point, they could have saved that bank. That made some bad loans, but it could have been rescued.
Mm-hmm.
They let it go. So hundreds of thousands of immigrants lost their savings, which of course triggered runs on other banks, and you didn't have a mortgage in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the Fed didn't see its role as trying to stabilize a system and made things worse. And all of them. I mean, Hoover, one of the things, he spent a lot. He was saying, oh, he didn't do anything. Yes, he did.
Mm-hmm.
Created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which became a cornerstone of the New Deal, which was a government entity that made loans to businesses and became a piggy bank, a source of political power. So anyway, Hoover, when the thing started to crater, brought in business leaders and labor leaders, and they agreed in return for no strikes, there'd be no cut in wages, which put pressure on businesses to put the squeeze on suppliers, since they couldn't cut costs, and so it ended up doing more harm than good. But Hoover, going through the 2021 depression, Hoover just thought, gee, we should be doing more than just standing by and letting the thing recover. Doesn't mean you wouldn't have safety nets and things like that. We had quite an elaborate safety net system in this country. But so he was very much of an activist, Roosevelt even more of an activist, and didn't get much recovery until after World War II.
So you make it through Princeton. So you go into college with this family training, if you will, in free enterprise. And so what was the experience like there? I think as Jacob was alluding to and we were talking about, now it seems so scientific and mathematized across so many different disciplines that really the human element gets lost. And so, but you went through an Ivy League. Did it try to undo any of the family training, or did it more solidify your thinking?
I only took one economics course for one semester. And instead,
so then maybe that's why.
But I did a lot of reading on economic history, but I didn't go in for the formal training. I majored in history.
Same.
Which
Same.
I think tells you what you need to know about human nature. By the way, just as an aside, Lincoln, when he was growing up, was very much of a skeptic, religious skeptic. Got him in trouble politically in his early days. But he did make the point he could recite biblical passages, not because he was religious when he was younger, but he said, in essence, everything you want to know about people you find in the Bible stories. You know, the good, bad, the ugly. It's all there. And so you read those tales and you
almost
see,
as if we were indeed created.
You don't have no illusions about people. Nor did the founders. They were horrified by the history of the religious wars.
They also knew their Hebrew.
Yes.
Many of them. And much of the English tradition, especially in that Glorious Revolution period, Selden and others, they all were fairly fluid in those tracks.
Well, one thing people should read, takes a little bit of effort, but worth it, is Calvin Coolidge's speech that he gave on the 150th anniversary of the Declaration. And it's been pointed out by some historians that actually he had a better understanding of the founding than any president other than Lincoln. And he relates, going back to the Dutch 1581, the influences that influenced this declaration and the spiritual part of it. He said breaking away from a country or an empire, that had happened before. He said people were, and he cited religious leaders about the sanctity of the individual, but he said this was the first time it was all brought together in a single document, these various strands. And he said also it was the first time these ideas were backed by an army in the field fighting for the independence.
Very well put. Very well put. I'm struck as well in the story of our founding about the importance of the Treaty of Paris that ended the 7 Years' War and the closing off of that frontier, and how that motivated our sort of American leadership to say that Britain doesn't really have the interest of the colonials in mind. But I think to your point as well, it's the joining of these strands. It is the theory, but it's also the application. And often I think to your point, Claudia, which you were asking earlier, how is it that free market economics, for example, can get has something of a strange rap, let's say, or has difficulty finding purchase in the marketplace of ideas. It's the theory and the application that has to be discussed. Absolutely, it's neither one nor the other by itself.
Well, the whole thing on profit, one of the things classical economics got hung up on was equilibrium. The idea that everything was smooth.
Or ought to be.
And they talked about perfect competition. Well, if you have perfect competition, what's the justification for profit? And this idea of static view of society, which is why Marx said would be the making everyone miserable. Even what was that Frenchman's name a few years ago has said, returns on capital are going to collapse or whatever. Piketty. When people like Schumpeter realized, no, this is a fluid situation, always changing. Some periods may be more calm than others, but always things are changing. And to Schumpeter, profit was not just, you're doing well. He said it's a cost of business because you have to replace what you're destroying or disrupting and keeping up even with what you have. And so if you don't have profit, he said, you have a stagnant economy. So it's not surplus from people's labor. It's a cost of keeping up and moving ahead. And it's an insight. I mean, John Stuart Mill couldn't understand profit. His wife was a socialist, so that didn't help. But they get hung up on it, and no, Schumpeter got it right. It's a cost of doing business. Yeah. We just focus on all the big yachts and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that's the everybody falling into the 10th commandment trap.
Well, as people like to cite, money's the root of all evil, whereas you have to read what came before it. The love of money is the root of all evil.
Right.
It's very different whenever you add that in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So get the economists to move away from the numbers and start visiting pin factories.
I was lucky enough to not go to Ivy League, where my economic training, I had a lot of influence from the Austrian school and very much in an Adam Smith tradition. So I feel very fortunate in that respect. But as Jacob was saying, not too many people in the economics profession, at least in academia, have too much respect for that flavor of economics.
By the way, Adam Smith did not like most businessmen.
He did not, especially if they got together. Yes. There's a famous passage about that.
So he had no illusion about them as persons, but he realized that when you're allowed to buy and sell with each other, resources are created, and people find ways to do it, which is why he would not be happy with this focus on the trade deficit. We got to keep out, devalue the money to improve exports and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that brought down the old Bretton Woods system after World War II, gold-based system, was not understanding how you keep the dollar stable. They thought, we need more dollars, which means printing money, which means undervaluing devaluing the. No, it just means you make sure that the dollar stays fixed to gold. It's a measuring rod. It's not money in this case. It's a measuring rod. And people say, it restricts the money. So, no, it doesn't. Between 1775 and 1900, the money supply in this country, base money, increased 160-fold. Gold supply, 3-fold. So it's just a measuring rod. And one of the things in the 60s they couldn't grasp is that if the dollar started to wobble against gold, which it would, means you tighten up a little to create less money. If it's going below 35, then hard to believe, $35
Right.
an ounce, you were starving you were overvaluing the dollar. So stability, be it no central banker in the world today talks about a stable currency.
So do you see digital currencies providing, in some sense, a constraint on our current monetary policies?
Not yet. And so you have to look at it two ways. One is you don't want central banks creating digital currencies.
Yes, that's
Agreed.
true.
That's a form of tyranny. But Bitcoin was created, I think, as a high-tech cry for help, given what governments were doing to money.
Okay.
But one of the mistakes they made, or he made, or whoever concocted this thing, was thinking if you restrict the supply, that'll make it valuable. Not realizing it's not supply, it's also demand. And you look at the Swiss franc. If you just look at the money supply, you think, oh, that poor little country must be having a hyperinflation. No, people want the franc. It's held its value held its purchasing value better than any currency in the world in the last 100 years. So people are quite willing to have a lot of it. So when people create these cryptos, it's really a speculative vehicle. You wouldn't use Bitcoin as a currency. You might use the technology, blockchain technology, to transfer funds away from the government. But you would not want to take a mortgage with Bitcoin. And but I think will be happening is creating cryptos that are tied to an asset like gold, trustworthy, which is going to take some work and transparency, so that people might start to use it in lieu of government money for a transaction. I want to buy your book. Well, let's have 3 Claudias tied to whatever, gold or whatever, and then you're going to get a real battle as governments try to preserve their monopoly. And what they'll do is try to say contracts in cryptos are not enforceable. You have to pay taxes in the old money, not the new money. So it's going to be quite a battle. And some countries, like Turkey, have banned cryptos for commercial purposes.
Interesting. I think I think it is fascinating times around the two people that I've heard speak, I think most interestingly about cryptocurrencies have really focused on stablecoins, specifically stablecoins tied to UST bills. And it would be Michael Every, who's a chief economist over at Rabobank, and Brett Johnson, who's an asset manager out of the Bay Area. And I think that to your point about supply and demand, and also sort of the government monopoly on currency, which to me it always struck me that that the United States government especially was never going to relinquish control of the currency, but also that CBDCs were a terrible idea, not just because of the sort of civil liberties issues, but also because it would be the Fed who would have their hands directly on that as well. But it seems like with, forgive me for carrying on a little bit, but
Please.
It ties to something that we've talked about, Ricardian comparative advantage as opposed to non-Ricardian competitive advantage, which exists in a time window. For example, another nation artificially suppressing the value of its currency, or having its state-owned banks sub-economically finance companies operating in specific strategic industries. And that the stablecoin, the advent of stablecoins, is potentially the pathway that this administration will choose to try to extend the dollar's lifespan as the global reserve currency. I covered a lot of ground there. and kind of broadly in a survey, forgive me, but it sort of is bubbling up in the head as we were talking about. Do you have any thoughts about any of that, stable coins and sort of the geopolitics, statecraft in the modern times?
The concept of something tied, fixed, transparency, because a lot of times, where are the reserves? That's going to be, there'll be breakthroughs there, which would challenge the monopoly. But Friedman makes the valid point that if you want to manipulate how you measure things, you end up hurting yourself. No country ever devalued its way to prosperity. And countries that love trying to pick winners and losers end up being losers. The French love that sort of thing. Champions. And so I remember in the 80s, Japan was going to take over the world. And we saw where that led.
Mr. Roboto.
And the
Tomarigato.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
the industry that was doing best and still is huge is the auto industry. It was the one industry, MITI, which was the government agency guiding all of this stuff. The industry resisted it. MITI said combine.
Okay.
And so instead you had all these companies trying to strive in a small market, which made them good at exporting, became a powerful industry. They went against the government. That's why Toyota is the foremost auto company in the world today, and saw before others, EVs weren't it, so they covered themselves like hybrids. So, but they never bet the company the way Ford did, GM did, on something people didn't want, certainly not with the way it was working now. And they want, and you talk about banks trying to help out. Well, one of the things, virtues of this country, is our multitudinous capital markets, all sorts of permutations. And in Europe, it's still dominated by big banks. In Asia, still there's a big bank domination, which inherently brings rigidities.
Indeed.
And one of the things that brought down the Jack Ma and Tony May, he was with Tencent, Jack Ma was with Alibaba, was that since they sold so much online, they created, especially Alibaba, a money fund. And people were happy to deposit because they could use that to buy stuff. But even more importantly, they knew with their data who was reliable and who wasn't reliable for credit. And the state banks went bonkers. So they put restrictions on, and eventually Ma was destroyed. He's now back again. They didn't shoot him as Mao would have done. But it's an anti-entrepreneurial economy now. One of the things that before Xi Jinping was the unstated deal was you could do what you want in business, just stay out of the politics. And China was doing a lot of catch-up, but also in high tech they were doing some real innovation. Now Xi Jinping's created an environment where you're getting less and less of that. So you want to play those games? Well, eventually, if we don't have a war, you're going to lose out, and that's what we have to realize. We don't have to imitate them to beat them. And also, this whole thing about countries, their borders, very real, sadly, in terms of security, but it's individual companies we have to worry about, and people in the Chinese equivalent garages are the ones who come up with stuff. And if they come up with something great, well, one of the things with Japan, where they pioneered on-time inventories, which is now out of fashion because of tariffs. But that concept actually started by IBM. Japanese auto industry and others glommed onto it. And then as they're eating our lunch, we said, aha, we better do this too. Yeah. So you get this cross-fertilization. if you're allowed to, that works, let's bring it here and try and improve upon it. And that's one of the things young people need, everyone needs to understand. It's not enough to invent something. You have to find applications for it. You have to have an environment where you make constant improvements, what we call
It doesn't stop.
Learning curve.
It doesn't stop.
Well, that's a great kind of wrap up. Is we'll be on college campus tonight with your lecture. We're going to have a lot of students, faculty, but also community members. So what is, advice that you would give to young people in terms of, a lot of them are worried about AI in terms of having a job. So in terms of just prospects for employment, but combined with that, hope for the future. They're not just worried about their own personal prospects, but just state of the world. So, what is advice, or what do you tell them?
Well, one of the reasons we have this pessimism in the world is that the traditional governors didn't deliver the goods. You look at this whole thing on windmills and solar panels, literally trillions of dollars, and where that could have gone, clean water, medical devices and the like, lost, and deindustrialized Germany, now struggling in autos, which they once owned, and because energy costs are so high, the Brits did the same thing. French less so because they were always big on nuclear. But they severely damaged, and they didn't control immigration. I like immigration, but it's got to be rules-based and not just open the borders. And so Europe was stagnating. And guess what happens? You get a political reaction. And you see it less so here, but still very real. So the bottom line is remove the barriers, and the innate energy will rise again. We see it already. Areas like healthcare, there's some big new things coming along. There's a drug that hasn't made its way out of the FDA yet, but can find through blood tests well before the symptoms show up for 50 different cancers. We all know with cancer, you get it early, you have a better chance of making it. And the time will come when we'll be able to replace hearts and lungs and kidneys like changing a tire instead of hoping we can get a donor before it's too late. So big things are coming, and healthcare is going to go from a system that is a huge drain to one of the most dynamic, because everyone wants to have good health. As consumers eventually get control of the healthcare markets. And that's why we need to liberalize, by the way, health savings accounts, remove all the crazy restrictions, because most companies now have high deductible plans. So you're paying more out of pocket. You want to know what these things cost now, because it's not just insurance will cover it, don't worry about it. And that's going to create, if we don't wreck it with government takeover, going to create a real consumer market. And one example is cosmetic surgery, which is not covered by insurance unless it's a result of disease or accident. Huge growth, but you've not had the kind of inflation there that you've had elsewhere. Huge breakthroughs. Why? Because you have a real market there.
Price transparency.
And exactly. And but the price transparency, you can push it from the top, but you have to have a market system where it gets reinforced in the marketplace. And right now, I don't know about your part of the world, but in our part of the world, there are always these ads for, you see it on TV for drugs, but the hospitals, where we can do this, that, or the other thing. No mention of price. And in closing on that, I think the world is going to go the way, in part, what Singapore has. Singapore, you're taxed, pay a big tax, but the money goes into your own health account. You buy the policy, not the employer. You choose the hospitals. You have ads on TV. This hospital is good for this reason. This insurance policy is great for that reason. So you have real competition. So they have universal coverage, because they do cover people who, for whatever reason, fall through the cracks. and they have longevity longer than ours now, and their costs, even though the population is aging, is still about 1/3 of our GDP.
Wow.
With outcomes as good or better. Doctors trained overseas, so this isn't voodoo stuff. This is real, and that's what you want, where there's competition, which, as we know, imperfect though we humans are, with competition, you try to strive to provide more and better for less. Voila.
Well put. Well said. Very well said.
I think that's a great place for us to stop. Thank you again for your time, Steve.
Thank you for yours.